From the sports betting capital of the world, Las Vegas, it's time for the show you can't afford to miss. The #1 weekly football preview, Wanna Bet. Get ready for valuable information, analysis, winning picks, and betting strategies. Your hosts, SEC gridiron guru Kip Keefer, and award-winning betting expert, writer, and sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, Kip Keefer. Let's go. Here's everything you need to win big. Wanna Bet.
Welcome, everybody, to Wanna Bet from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, more specifically from the Superbook, Westgate, Las Vegas, where Kip Keefer, Case Keefer, bringing you another edition of the show. We are in the middle of kind of a series of broadcasts each week where we're talking about the numbers game that's such a part of college football, such a part of professional football handicapping now. Case is one of the foremost experts on handicapping and wagering in the country. We are delighted to have his expertise on display for you, and hopefully you're picking up some information that help you win. Case, we left off last week talking about some of the more important numbers, the productivity per plays, the third down conversions. We got into kind of red zone discussion. As just a casual fan that's not really numbers oriented, you tend to remember key games from the schedule where the inefficiency in the red zone just kind of sticks with you. And the prime example of that, last year, Florida at Kentucky, the Gators had the ball inside the 10-yard line with just a minute left in the game and ran 9 plays based on penalties. They kept getting like resets, new set of downs because it was half the distance to the goal penalties. They ran 9 plays inside the 10-yard line and did not score. That kind of immediately brands that team as inefficient in the red zone. Is that a bad way to draw conclusions from one just awful example?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation because really when something like that happens, there's 2 specific threads. Should they be judged for that? Absolutely. Can we make content about kind of making fun of them or saying how inefficient they were? Yes. I mean, there's no denying they were inefficient. However, how predictive is that going forward? And I think that's the most important analytics you want to use as a bettor. And luckily, a whole lot of the productivity things are more predictive than that. Like, yeah, we can say they're inefficient. We can say what the problems were. But is it predictive going forward? If they get down to the 10-yard line, again in a future game and have 9 plays, how likely are they to score? They're still extremely likely. Aside from the fact that they didn't in this one instance, I don't necessarily think there's a lot of predictive value that happened to that. Congratulations to Kentucky. I don't remember that game especially well, but when I look at that game, I believe it would be one of those where you really look at the numbers that matter, and Florida's going to have put up a lot better numbers. Crazy things happen in a single football game. Kentucky won that day, probably didn't deserve to. If you look at the game going forward, what's going to be more predictive? That Kentucky's going to stay on this crazy stretch of having 9 stops inside the 10-yard line and win a 1-point game or whatever it is, or is it more likely that over time, Florida, the 90 yards they got to gain there is going to mean more than the last 10 yards they couldn't pick up? I tend to lean to the more predictive way, being getting down there is even more important.
Sure. Because statistically, that game was just insane. Florida outgained them like 4-1, had 3 times more first downs, just completely dominated the game. But it was kind of and I guess really kind of rounding into the question is, on the human factor, that game to me was kind of an indicator of how bad Florida was on fire, and it proved out the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly... The hard thing to do with that is, and I totally agree with you, I mean, Florida last year was a disaster, a fire, and they shouldn't have been. I mean, the product on the field was pretty good. They had good players, but obviously there was a lot of turmoil with Dan Mullen going on. And then, so you can pick up on those things, and I'm not saying don't put those into your handicap. I just think that you also kind of usually are going to need a numbers backbone for that. I can't think of an exact example off my head, but I promise you there's been other occasions where a coach looks like he's under strife, that it's over. It's the teams are belling against him, and then what happens? They bounce back. It's so hard to pinpoint exactly when this is going to happen. We look back now and we have confirmation bias on what happened with Florida, but I promise you there's coaches out there that have gone through rough stretches that we said, is this the guy? And they end up being great. I know this isn't a perfect example, but I still am kind of suspect of some of this guy's decision, but Georgia just won a national championship. Those first 2 years, Kirby Smart made a lot of questionable decisions. I didn't like a lot of his decisions. I'm sure there are some people wondering, is he the guy? Look what ends up happening. They bounce back. They blow everyone out. So I'm not saying there's no merit in that. There certainly is. I think it's just a lot harder than, the talking heads when we look back. It's a lot harder to pinpoint when is something going to totally go downhill because, that does happen. Things go downhill. But a lot of times teams will take off the other way, too. It's just a lot harder to identify, I think, than maybe we give it credit in hindsight.
Well, again, the numbers are going to play out over the long term, pretty much what the situation is. But you mentioned on a previous show when Billy Napier was at Louisiana Tech at first, or just at Louisiana, I'm sorry, he wasn't at Louisiana Tech.
The Ragin' Cajuns.
The Ragin' Cajuns, sorry about my apologies. Louisiana, you said as his coaching career continued and he started to get better players, that he became more conservative in his approach. So I guess just to kind of wrap up this kind of train of thought, the numbers end up certainly reflecting that, do they not?
I think there is a school of thought that, everything that is in the numbers, it does kind of reflective on the coach. However, a way I'd be more willing to make an adjustment on a team, or like you've said in previous shows, I pick every game for Las Vegas Sun, LasVegasSun.com. You can find them in college football. But if I think a number is just about right on a game, just about perfect, but I think there's a huge coaching edge in one area, I'm more willing to make a bigger adjustment for that and take the better coach, because I think that does matter. And Napier's a great example. Just if I'm watching a game, and I actually had seen a lot of Louisiana games because I was high on the team a couple years ago. They played a lot of those Tuesday night Sun Belt games. If I see them consistently making decisions that are going to hurt their win probability, i.e. just the most famous one, my pet peeve, I think a lot of people's pet peeve, is just punting when you're in plus territory, expected points territory. If you do something like that, it's more likely that if a game's close, if a line's close, I'm going to more likely be on the other team because I want a coach that's more pushing towards maximizing that win probability, that's more aggressive. I know it's sounds easy to narrow it down to aggressive versus conservative, but usually in football, in my opinion, the more aggressive choice is the right choice. And there's still a lot of coaches that totally do not adhere to that thinking. And those are the guys I'm more likely to downgrade and I'm more likely to ultimately bet against.
I have a friend who's very adept in his opinions and his knowledge of college football. And basically his betting approach in college football is kind of simplistic. He basically puts more emphasis on which team has the better quarterback than in that game. So from an individual, we've been talking about team statistics, but I'm sure there's breakdowns on player by player. So does someone's individual stats ever stand out and affect your opinion on games?
Certainly. I think looking at the players and what impact they have, makes a pretty big difference. It is hard to narrow down exactly how much it's worth. However, if there is a position to do that for, it's quarterback, that's obviously going to have the biggest effect on your team. But you have to look at everything. That it's kind of tough just to narrow it down to quarterbacks. I hate to keep going back to Georgia, but they won the national championship last year. How many times would you have been betting against them down the stretch with Stetson Bennett, who you probably, by conventional wisdom, is worse than the vast majority of quarterbacks that he faced off with, at least in the big games. So, I don't think putting all that too much emphasis on one player is a lot, but, having a familiarity with the personnel is definitely an important thing.
And Stetson Bennett's back for his 15th season this year.
Absolutely.
The defending national championship quarterback. Again, the subject to me is so fascinating, and I guess to wrap this segment up, what comes first? Do you do the analysis on your numbers and then compare it to the line for that particular game, or do you start with the line and look for reasons why maybe it's right on target or maybe it's off?
Yeah, I try to come up with my own line, some of my own numbers, some of the available out there. Try to come up with my own numbers, then look at it to the line. If it's way off, I try to figure out why. If it's close, that's actually a little bit better, as I think I'm kind of on the same line. But then I can shade one way or the other.
Well, again, we're going to continue. We're going to at least have one more week of analytics. I have some more questions for Case, and I'm hoping that all of you are really getting a lot of good information out of this discussion. And speaking of information, Case's picks on college and pro football, his best bets of the week, are coming up next right here on Wanna Bet.
Hey, it's Kip Keefer back on Wanna Bet for another edition of My Best Bets. I want to apologize for missing last week and shout out Kip for filling in for me and giving some plays on both college and the NFL, where I'll go back again today. I think we had won a couple weeks in a row with the setup of 3 college games, 4 NFL. So that's what I'll do again here now. Still been kind of back and forth for the year on the show. I believe I'm 13-1 on college and 12-9 on the NFL. I'll once again plug to check out my betting columns on LasVegasSun.com to get this stuff earlier and better. It's kind of ridiculous. I think I'm 72 games over 500 this year, picking every college football game. That comes out on Tuesdays, so you can beat the market, lock in some of those. I write about it this week. It's a little bit bittersweet because I'm not doing well on my top-rated plays, but if you want to get an idea of the whole college football landscape, 72 games over 500, running a little hot. I don't expect that to keep up all year, but I do think it's a good resource that you can check out. With that being said, let's dive into the college slate. Like I said, 3 plays, and I want to start in the AAC. If you remember, I think it was only after 2 or 3 games we made a big bet on Cincinnati plus 350 to repeat as conference champions. I can't complain about that bet now. They're undefeated in the conference. I think that's now even money, so clearly we did secure some value, have some equity now, but it's probably their toughest game this week. They are going to UCF in a pick'em, and I am actually going to bet against Cincinnati here. I like UCF at pick. When I placed that bet on Cincinnati to win the conference, I really thought we were going to see more out of their offense. I thought it was going to develop more, maybe see some more explosion as the season goes on, and that just hasn't happened. They're still good defensively, and they're decent offensively too. I mean, they can easily hold their own in the AAC, but it's just such a slog and a grind to watch. UCF, I don't feel like you ever know what you're getting week to week. They're great one week. They look like a vintage Knights team. Then the next week, they're terrible. Last week, we're coming off one of those terrible performances. They lost 34-13 to East Carolina, who is decent, but you shouldn't be losing by 3 touchdowns to them if you're UCF. They do have that explosive offense, though, unlike Cincinnati with John Reese Plumlee. He's putting up big numbers every week. I like UCF here regardless, would be betting it, but I think it also helps that I have that big future bet in the conference. So in the back of my mind, this is a way to kind of lay off some of that exposure by picking UCF to beat them outright here. There's still a chance Cincinnati loses this game and gets to the conference championship. I think still a good chance. But just this one, I think it's a close game, but I think UCF is a little better, so I would take them at pick. Next, let's go to the Big 12. West Virginia hosting TCU as an 8-point underdog, and I think even here and everywhere, I've not liked this West Virginia team all year. I've been picking against them, but I have to take the points here. I'm taking West Virginia plus 8 against TCU. The only thing I'm worried about is that the Horned Frogs have some kind of like quarterback voodoo doll, because this is just absolutely ridiculous, the run of good luck they are on. 4 straight Big 12 games, 4 straight Big 12 games where you've seen the opposing starting quarterback get hurt, starting with Dylan Gabriel when they blew out Oklahoma. Then, of course, Jalen Daniels, whose numbers, really spurred the Kansas turnaround. You see what's happened to my alma mater, the Jayhawks, without him. Top 5 quarterback by a lot of metrics like QBR and things. He gets hurt against TCU. They still narrowly lose. Spencer Sanders gets hurt when they play Oklahoma State. And then last week, I think Kansas State had a 10-point lead down to their 3rd quarterback after the other 2 get hurt. So I don't know how TCU's doing this. I don't see it as super sustainable. I think they're a little overvalued now. Morgantown is one of the toughest places in the Big 12 to play. I really don't like this team at all, and who knows with the way things are going, JT Daniels might get hurt the first play out there, but I think 8's too much. I think a touchdown maximum. I know this is one of the bigger games in the day, so wanted to include it. I like West Virginia plus 8. Finally, let's go to the ACC. This one not going to be as fun to bet, but it's a line that stands out to me. I think is the right one to take. I know as part of Kip's picks, filling in for me last week, he went against Miami with Duke and was rewarded there. I had no problem with that. I picked Duke as well, but this week I am actually going to be on the Hurricanes laying 2 at Virginia. If you think the Hurricanes are bad, wait till you get a taste of the Cavaliers, who I feel like are just as big of a mess with their own first-year coach, Tony Elliott, just without any of the talent, the underlying talent that the Hurricanes have. If Miami can't get it right this week, I don't think it's ever getting right. I don't want to go too drastic, but I always had questions about Mario Cristobal as a coach, but Virginia is just wretched. I mean, a few weeks ago, this number is probably Miami 17 or something. To get it was only a 2-point favorite. I think this is the spot where the Hurricanes turn turn it around. I can't believe this would be less than a touchdown, so that's obviously a huge edge. So the picks are Miami -2, West Virginia +8, and UCF pick 'em. For the NFL, let's get to it next. We're going to start with the team we've ridden a lot, but now we've picked against 2 weeks in a row. Carolina +5 against Atlanta. Actually, now second thought, I don't know if Kip picked against Atlanta last week, but I know both me and him liked Cincinnati against them, and that certainly played out to be true. The Bengals got a big win, and I honestly think the Panthers are going to be in this game for a lot of the same reasons. Atlanta's secondary was such a strength of theirs in this hot start to the year, and it is gone now. They don't have that strength anymore with Casey Hayward hurt, now A.J. Terrell missing. I know P.J. Walker, not exactly a guy that's going to strike fear into you for the Panthers, but now it looks like Sam Darnold could be playing, another guy that I know there's not a good consensus around, but going into the year, this game was a pick-em. These teams are still relatively evenly matched. I think there's been a little bit of a overreaction to Carolina trading away some guys like Christian McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson. Those guys make highlights, but are they really affecting your underlying power rating that much? I don't think so. This is 4.5 most places, which is also fine, but there's a lot of fives, or at least a couple fives still on the board, so I'm going to go Carolina +5 against Atlanta. All underdogs on the NFL today. Next one, I'm going to go with Arizona +4 going to Minnesota. I'm just looking for places to buy the Cardinals right now. I think I've even talked about it on the show. I thought mid-season would kind of be the place to look for the Cardinals to get a little bit better. They're getting some guys back on defense, and of course DeAndre Hopkins back after serving his suspension. You already saw what a difference maker he was on last week's Thursday Night Football. Caught a touchdown, had a bunch of yards when he wasn't even really fully ready to go. It looked like he was a little out of shape, not ready back to be in the game. I think they're going to get better week after week. Minnesota really fortunate to be 5-1. Maybe they win another close game here. As a future ticket holder on a lot of Minnesota stuff, I hope they could still win, but I think 4 is too much. Maybe this should be 3. Arizona +4. Houston +2 hosting the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill hurt his ankle last week, may not play here, and I really don't think Houston is that bad. You can convince me they're the worst team in the NFL, but I don't feel like this is like the past several years in the NFL where the bad teams are just really bad. There's 3 top teams clearly in the Bills, Chiefs, and Eagles. Then there's about a 4 through 10, pretty clear. Shake them up, put them wherever you want. But then beyond that, from about 11 to 32, I think all these teams are about even. And I think Davis Mills does some good things. Houston has some speed on their defense. I like them +2 in a divisional game, especially one where we might have to see Malik Willis make the first start of his career. And finally, running a little long here, so I'll be quick, but I'm always picking against the Bengals. I'm going to go Monday Night Football, Cleveland +3.5 against the Bengals. I already told you why I think the Bengals had success last week against the Falcons. That was a really good setup. No pass rush for Atlanta, beaten up secondary. This game's going to be a lot closer. As a divisional game, Cleveland is really unlucky to be 2-5. I think every loss has been by 3 points or less. I think this one's going to be a lot closer. I've heard people this week say, the Bengals are the 4th best team in the NFL now because of a 1 win over a beaten up Falcons. I don't buy it. I've got the Browns +3.5. So Browns, Texans, Cardinals, Panthers. Stick around for Kip's picks on the SEC next.
Listen to what callers are saying about the morning after.
But I just wanted to say thank you. You guys bring a lot of information. To me, your show is a lot different than most. I can't really pinpoint it. It's just maybe it's the friendliness. Maybe it's just the way that you guys come across. More like family to me. And I just love listening every Sunday when I get the opportunity.
The morning after, Sundays 9 to 11 a.m. on WJOX 94.5 Birmingham.
Hey everybody, Kip Keefer ready for the SEC report this week on Wanna Bet. Appreciate everybody being tuned in. Hope your weekend's off to a fantastic start. The SEC schedule this week, it maybe is the precursor for what everybody's already talking about and looking forward to for next week, as the Georgia-Tennessee showdown in Athens looms just like 8 days away. But there's some business on both sides to be taken care of on this Saturday in the schedule, and it's going to be interesting to see if one or both teams are caught looking ahead a little bit, because they're not playing weak little sisters. They're playing quality SEC teams. And to really set the stage for this just epic matchup. Both teams have to handle their business this week. Georgia, of course, in Jacksonville in the great event formerly known as the world's greatest cocktail party. But of course, we've been discouraged from using that term because surely now people going to the game aren't going to partake in any alcoholic beverages. But I digress. Let's talk about Georgia, Florida. Of course, this is the great annual showdown between the border foes. And Georgia has had much the better of it in recent years. This game has really kind of gone in streaks. Georgia runs off a pretty good winning streak. Florida then answers in kind, and it's sort of been the pattern of the game. Going in, the initial thoughts are this game's on a, quote, neutral, unquote, field in Jacksonville that for many years this stadium was called the Gator Bowl. So the Gator Bowl is not a neutral field, an hour and a half from the Florida campus and 4.5 hours from Athens, Georgia. Let's just go ahead and once again, as we do annually, kind of throw some really cold water on that notion. It's an advantage for Florida, although the crowd is 50-50. A lot of reasons economically and philosophically why this game continues to be in Jacksonville. But it's a Georgia home game, and they have this year, every other year, the one team is the home team. So this game theoretically should have been in Athens if it was not on the, quote, neutral field, unquote. And Georgia is at home in the Gator Bowl against the Gators. All of that pontificating aside, let's talk about the game. Georgia has never, ever been a bigger favorite against Florida, ever in the series, than they are this time. 23 points, Georgia favored over Florida. Now, I would say that there's justification for that big line. The Gators have been sputtering. They lost to LSU the last time we saw them in action. They have not been extremely impressive, with the exception of their opening game against Utah, which now we know is probably an aberration. I don't think if those teams played again tomorrow that Florida would win that game. Florida played very well in Knoxville against Tennessee early in the season, only to fall by 5 points in that game, coming back with a big rally at the end to make it interesting. So, I mean, the Gators have quality players. They have Anthony Richardson. Georgia entering a stretch of their next 4 games where they will face 4 of the top NFL prospects at quarterback in the country. Back to back. They get Richardson with Florida. Then they get Hooker in Tennessee, Will Rogers at Mississippi State, and Will Levis up in Kentucky against the Wildcats. So this is step 1 on a very difficult journey, gauntlet, if you will, for the Georgia Bulldogs if they will have any ideas about repeating their national championship. So Florida, Georgia, 23 points. Georgia's got to have a little bit of an eye on that game next week in Athens. I think the Gators will play their best game of the year, as they usually do against Georgia. I have to take the points here. Florida Gators plus 23 against the Bulldogs. Tennessee, Kentucky. This is another game that's a big rivalry, particularly for Kentucky, because Tennessee has much had the better of it there throughout the history of this game. And Kentucky goes to Neyland Stadium. They really don't have much to lose here. They have a chance to really redeem their season. And Tennessee is the up-and-comer, the wannabe. Their focus has to be somewhat on Athens next week. So this is a very troublesome spot for the Volunteers. They just got to survive and advance here. This is more like an NCAA tournament basketball game in my mind than a football matchup, because they just have to find a way to survive and win the game so they can set up the epic showdown next week in Athens. Kentucky's going to come in and play loose. They've got quality players. And before you get really enamored with Tennessee, remember, this team has had 2 big home games that they have prevailed both times. They beat Florida, as we mentioned, by 5. They beat Alabama, blowing some big leads by 3. This is a quality team coming in, Kentucky, and they're a 13-point underdog. I got to take the points once again. So in both cases, I think there'll be a little peeking ahead, and both teams are just going to need to try to win and not necessarily cover. I like Kentucky plus 13. Quickly, one other game, Auburn, of course, hosting Arkansas. They both were off last week. We said preseason Arkansas may have a tough time matching their success of especially last year. Their schedule pretty tough. I give them big props. They beat Cincinnati and BYU, their non-conference opponents that are a lot tougher matchups than most teams have on their schedule in non-conference play. But they have shown some slip-ups, including a bad loss at Mississippi State. Arkansas is still a dynamic offensive team. KJ Jefferson's terrific. Auburn's defense is game, but wears down as the game goes on. And even the bye week can't fix Brian Harson's biggest problem. His offensive line is terrible. They can't really throw the ball very much. Arkansas's defense vulnerable, but more to the pass than the run. I think Auburn will hang around in this game and play hard like they always do, but the pattern is established. They wear down at the end. Arkansas give the 3 and take the Razorbacks. Going to be a great week of SEC football. I hope you all have success. We got to get our record improved. We're 6 games under 500, which is really depressing because feel like we've picked pretty well and had some things not go our way. Let's see if we can turn it around this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening and watching Wanna Bet. We appreciate you being on board. Have a fantastic winning weekend.